Thank you very much, Minister. Over to you. Honorable Hadebe, stand by.
Thank you, Chair and Honorable Van Menen. And I agree with a lot of what you said, surprisingly. We agree, at least, that we should not politicize this process. We agree that load shedding has been around. There have been mishaps in terms of delays in first deciding on building of Medupi and Kusile, and secondly, the delays in the construction and development of those projects themselves. And there have been lacuna, so to speak, as far as what was requested before the Ruyter's time and after his time, for 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts to be provided in whatever period, in order that there's the space to undertake the maintenance that is required. And you're absolutely right that the situation in Europe, certainly for the Northern Hemisphere, but elsewhere as well, has created volatility as far as energy markets are concerned. And hopefully we have peace in that area and some negotiations commence sooner rather than later. The one area where I disagree with you, this is not a mission to shoot the messenger. Mr. De Ruyter is not a messenger. He was in charge of an institution. He was responsible in terms of his contractual obligations, by virtue also of his position as CEO, for whatever Eskom did or did not do. And his expressions about corruption are nothing new. We've all said it before his time, during his time, and we'll say it after his time, which is a point I tried to illustrate earlier on. There's nothing new there. What is new and interesting, and the South African public would be interested in this, was he recording every conversation that he had with everybody? Was he more interested in writing a book that would mask his legacy as far as performance at Eskom is concerned? And is that what this book is about? Because if the message is there's corruption at Eskom, we've all heard it before. And that's not, as you correctly point out, the issue. The issue is what are you doing about it? And what are the law enforcement agencies doing about it at the end of the day? And what are each of us contributing to minimizing the possibilities of corruption? Because we want to see a society where this phenomenon does not exist in any form. So this is not about shooting the messenger. This is not this poor little guy that's being attacked. I mean, he goes into personal descriptions of all sorts, I hear. I haven't read the book. Is that necessary to give an account of what you did or didn't do at an institution like Eskom, in order to explain to people why Eskom is where it is today, after 3 years of his stint there, at the end of this period? If you are in charge, you are in charge. If you are in charge, the buck stops with you. If you are in charge, you must show a sense of responsibility, and if you haven't accomplished your mission, show a sense of remorse. I'm sorry, South Africa. I tried my best. I couldn't do better than what I did. That's what was required. So, forgive me for disagreeing with you as far as that is concerned. And then you don't go around making allegations about individuals. That's character assassination to defend yourself. And some would say that's narcissistic behavior at the end of the day. But we're not here to analyze his psychology. we are looking at the far more important things as a country. On the question of the hawks, I mean, in the presentation to you, on slide 15, last week, but there was another slide as well, but in this particular slide, they say that there are currently 3 known investigations linked to the Ruyter, namely an alleged poisoning case in which Mr. De Ruyter is a complainant, alleged failure to lodge a Section 34 report in terms of PRECA, which I believe he did the day before he appeared before you, and what is this? Yeah. This is still pursuing the PRECA point. But where there's a slide 7, I think, where they say, this is still about Section 34. They say they made a number of attempts to approach him, and they couldn't find him, he wouldn't respond, etc., etc. But I'm aware, because he did tell me, that he went on to meet the head of the NPA. He met the head of Hawks. He met the head of SIU. He met the head of the South African police, amongst others that he might not have told me about. And those were all of his own initiative. Good, he took the initiative. And as I pointed out already, South Africans are impatient. They want to see people who are messing up their lives in orange overalls. And I don't care where they come from or what their origins are. If they are guilty of engaging in this kind of conduct, then the law must take its course. You say the board is not engaged. In fact, they're quite engaged, but I think what you found was a board that is still finding its feet in a very complex environment, probably. I haven't been through any recording, but I've heard bits and pieces. I will check with the chairperson about the issue that you are raising, and certainly make him aware of their responsibility in this regard. And as a shareholder, we will make sure that the board applies its minds. But I don't think it would be fair to say that they are not engaged in this particular instance. At the same time, we should not have expectations of a board about work that a law enforcement agency should be doing. That might be a bit of an unfair burden that we are placing on the board itself. You say that as a shareholder, I must make sure that these bodies intervene, stroke work, stroke do their bit. And that is why I've set up any number of discussions, interactions, and ensure that action was taken. And I'll give you one other illustration outside of Eskom. The issue of cable theft is a big issue as far as Transnet is concerned. So this is probably going into 2022. With the assistance of Mr. Mufamadi, senior police officer, the Transnet security people, and others were brought together at my behest, and we discussed how the police in particular, but other law enforcement agencies, could mitigate the issue of cable theft. It had some impact in some areas, but there's 30,000 kilometers of rail, so it's hard to monitor all of it. We also, at a particular point in time, I'm not sure what the status is today, had the industry working with us, particularly on the Ermelo-Richards Bay line. Drones were made available, people on the ground were made available, and that did have an impact in those places where the monitoring was taking place in order to minimize either cable theft or any other kind of interference on the line. So these matters have been raised in various fora, but I hear you, and to the extent that it is within my capability, but it's also a matter that you could raise with Professor Mufamadi, who's better placed to intervene in these regards, so that we can get more action going on this particular front. Is there the political will to pursue the two names or more names. Well, I think we're all aware by now that there was a Brigadier Berger who was involved in one way or another in this project. And in that instance, that's an indication of the fact that the SAPS is aware. And now, if this gap between information and evidence is narrowed in some way, the law enforcement agencies must do what they have to do. We can't instruct them to do anything. And that, I think, has been an important precedent that the President has set as well, that there shall not be any kind of interference with the work that they have to do as far as law enforcement is concerned. Excuse me. On the question of debt, I think you make a valid point that if we're not careful, if too many people go off-grid, Eskom's revenue will decline over time, and its capabilities will therefore decline as well. But what we have to look at and start modeling, and some of that work has been done, is what would a new transmission company bring in as cash, because it will generate funding of its own. I've had now 2 or 3 interactions with the China Grid Company, which is the largest transmission company in the world. And the way they run their show, including the 68%, I think, control they have in the Portuguese grid and a similar control in the Philippines grid, shows that this is an area where, if you like, a new business model will begin to emerge, where how you make money as an energy entity begins to change over time. Your point about grid collapse, Mr. Kasim is speaking the truth. And essentially, what he is saying is the following, that in South Africa, through the kind of expertise that we have deployed in Eskom and that they have been able to retain in Eskom, what the levels of load shedding does is to manage the supply-demand equilibrium and to ensure that the transmission grid works, as it seems to work elsewhere as well, again, subject to correction, at 50 megahertz. And what they do at the control center is to watch that number 50. If it falls below 50, they release a pump storage station or they operate a OCGT to again get the supply right so that 50 megahertz is targeted again. Secondly, the purpose of levels of load sharing is precisely to ensure that the grid does not collapse, that all of us will make a contribution actively or passively in order to make sure that the appropriate level of demand is operating at the right time in order to manage the supply that is available at that particular point in time. A grid collapse is where there's a total mismatch between demand and supply, where there is no buffering and safety factor built in, and where you have what people elsewhere in the world call blackouts. It's happened in California many times, in the most advanced economy at this stage in the world, but it's happened elsewhere as well. Texas was a recent example in the United States as well. And when he says they don't think that they would get there, is that he's actually explaining that we've built in enough buffers through levels of load shedding to manage the equilibrium between supply and demand. And that is why it's quite important that all of us support, if you like, demand-side management. How we put off geysers, how we use our kettles, how we leave lights on or off, and so on, can save up to 1,000 megawatts a day. And that can make an important contribution to managing this balance between supply and demand as well. So be assured that we have some very good professionals operating in the systems operator area, and we will make sure that they are very frank in the assessment of where we find ourselves, and equally frank with the public about what to expect as well. And whilst being realistic on the one hand, my colleague, Dr. Ramakopa, will be doing whatever he can to ensure that as many units stay online as possible during this particular period. And the operator level expertise is reinforced in an appropriate kind of way where required. And at the same time recognize that we are in a particularly bad situation because of the 3 units at Kusile not being available and the 1 unit at Kuberg undergoing the refurbishment that it is undergoing, which gives us a loss of approximately 3,000 megawatts, which you would normally have in a winter situation. So this is an extraordinary set of circumstances that we find ourselves in. But if there's anything new, Chairperson, we'll make sure that you're aware of it. Thank you.
All right. No, thank you very much, Minister.